Welcome to Musing Heavy, the website devoted to alternative reflections on hard rock and heavy metal. My name is Stephen Meyer, and we're going to do part two of a discussion based on my essay entitled Collecting Heavy Music in a World of Streaming. And in this series, I'm going to provide justification for maintaining a music collection largely made up of physical products, say CDs or vinyl or that type of thing. Now, I am not trying to convert people away from streaming. If that's what you're doing, not at all. If it's working for you, I couldn't be happier. But I just want to further the discussion on some of the issues that are emerging regarding streaming services, and especially as it applies to heavy metal, and especially some of the extreme heavy metal that we listen to. But having said that, I think a lot of what I'm saying in this series does apply to folks who like all types of music, right? Now, in this particular part two, I guess the key word that we're looking at here would be security. I'm going to start to critique the streaming platform a little bit in this part. And by security, I mean, how secure is your ability to access extreme music in this streaming world, right? And another way we're going to look at security is how secure is streaming as a revenue source for the artists who perform extreme music, right? So let's dig into that a little bit. All right, share my screen with all the fine people. And as always, if you'd rather read the complete essay in text form, the links are provided below. So you're more than welcome to do that as well, of course. Okay, so here we are. How secure is extreme metal on streaming services? Okay, well, just to set this up a little bit, to put it simply, when you stream a song from a platform such as Spotify, Apple, or Amazon, three of the biggies right there, you are renting the right to play it, okay? As such, someone else makes decisions with regards to what you can access, right? And in a sense, it's sort of like an apartment landlord, right? And this agreement can be altered or perhaps even revoked, okay? More about this renting versus owning idea coming up throughout this series as well. But on the other hand, conversely, when you legally or illegally, for that matter, download songs, or when you buy a CD or vinyl recording, you possess a copy of that work, right? Granted, if you have a CD or you've downloaded the album, you certainly do not own the songs or the album artwork, right? But you definitely have jurisdiction over the contents within that package for your personal use, right? I believe there's a certain firmness that occurs when you purchase a CD or a vinyl copy in particular, or even when you save downloaded songs for storage on your computer hard drive, right? There's something permanent there. You've made a permanent investment to your music collection when you're doing that, right? To me, streaming is a really different thing. Even though the streaming industry is populated by a number of firms of various sizes, it is effectively controlled by a handful of large and influential streaming platform companies, okay? Now, to use economic jargon, and we won't get too deep with this, but it's a cool little application that we're going to go through, I think. To use economic jargon, this is essentially an oligopoly, right? And I prepared just a quick little demo on that you might find interesting. So here's my beautiful little drawing, such as it is, I guess. Okay, so what do we mean by this oligopoly? Okay, well, in general, what an oligopoly is it's an economic sector that's dominated by just a handful of very influential companies. Now, this could be any sector. This could be the car sector, the beer sector, furniture sector, various foods, on it goes, right? But the point is, there's a few very dominant firms that basically set the pace of everything that happens in that industry, okay? Now, how many firms? 2 to maybe 7 or 8. It's a small number, okay? A duopoly would be that 2 firms are dominating the industry. A monopoly is 1 firm dominates the sector or the industry, right? Now, if we turn this to streaming platform providers, we can see there are actually 4 oligopolists or 4 companies, streaming companies, that basically dominate the entire industry. Okay, it's not that they're the only four. It's just that there's four that are so dominant, they are essentially the oligopolists, right? So Spotify, which actually has a third of all streams and a third of all sales, it's the big kahuna, but certainly Amazon, Apple, and YouTube are also very substantial. In fact, just these four companies alone have 3/4 or 75% of all global streams, right? So this is clearly an oligopoly sort of operating, right? And if you look at just North America, 90% plus of all streams are coming from these four companies, right? So if you're a streamer, the odds are you're streaming from one or more of these companies. Now, as is with any oligopoly structure, it's not just that these are the only companies. There can be any number of other smaller companies in the industry, and there are. Tidal, of course, some people, again, because of the high quality you can get, there are a small number of people that subscribe to Tidal. SoundCloud, Deezer, Pandora, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So any oligopoly industry could have hundreds of firms, but the point is a handful of them really control what's going on, right? They set the pace. They set the pace for the pricing. They set the pace for the competition, the way you approach competition. They set the pace for how the product's delivered. They set the pace for the advertising, the promotion, all that stuff, right? So if you're not one of the big players, you more or less do what the big players are doing. Otherwise, you're not going to stay in business, right? And then the big players themselves compete very strongly with each other, right? But it ultimately means that you have a small number of firms that are, and really a small number of people at the end of the day, that are controlling the entire sector, okay? One quick little side note to this. Tencent is a really big streaming platform company, but they really only operate in China, right? So if you're in China, Tencent would definitely be an oligopolist. They'd be added to this group, right? But outside of China, they're not, right? So this would apply specifically to most of the world, especially North America, Western Europe as well. You'd have the same kind of structure, okay? All right, so tightly controlled is the idea here, that the streaming industry is very tightly controlled. Okay, so let's go back to the paper here, right? So again, to use economic jargon, this is an oligopoly. Amongst other things, this business structure makes the entire artist to record label to streaming platform to internet provider, ultimately to the music fan consumer path vulnerable to broad manipulations, right? So I'm going to kind of put this together for you in a second here. So why do I think the streaming industry is not particularly, or might not be as secure as we think it is? Because it's controlled by so few players, right? Again, more on that coming up. So it's vulnerable or potentially vulnerable to broad manipulations. As a result, the ongoing reliability of streaming to the consumer is theoretically less stable than maintaining a physical product collection, right? Do people worry about this possible transient nature of material available from streaming? Are people worried about the security? I think most people clearly are not, right? I mean, given the popularity of streaming, most people, I'm sure this is something they're not even concerned about, or they haven't even really thought about it, right? Should they be concerned? Well, maybe yes, maybe no, but at least I think it's an argument worth making, and that's sort of what I'm doing here, right? Okay, so while some, I'm talking about streamers here, may see it as a deal breaker, it's evident that many fans streaming extreme metal, so we're going to talk mostly about extreme metal here, or extreme music in general. So most fans can tolerate incomplete discographies of their favorite bands if it means access to thousands of other titles, all right? So most people they're okay with that. More about that in part one if you're interested, on the quantity advantages of streaming and how some of that's a bit of an illusion. But anyway, we'll leave that for now. So, but anyway, a fan, say they like death metal or black metal or some of the more extreme controversial types of metal, right? They're probably okay with the idea, yeah, I don't have access to every title, especially if it's more obscure, but given how many titles I do have access to, I'm cool with this, right? But I'm guessing it would be more bothersome to this fan of streaming, right, or who likes extreme metal, and potentially far-reaching would be any type of supply restriction that might occur because of, or brought forth because of, censorship of some form, right? Okay, I admit This does not appear to be a threat at the moment. However, if you're a heavy metal fan, especially of certain vintage, like, I mean, you know, I've grown up with the threats of censorship of heavy metal many, many times, right? And in fact, every extreme form of art always is under threat of censorship from time to time, right? I think there is always potential for irrational judgments when it comes to the dissemination of music perceived to be dangerous, okay? Let's face it, a certain number of mainstream folk will always cling to the idea that society would be better off without the recordings of, say, Venom, Slayer, Morbid Angel, Mayhem, Cannibal Corpse, etc., 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 to name a few extreme metal acts, good examples. But I mean, it doesn't even have to be metal. I mean, there was a time Alice Cooper was considered very dangerous and a problem for society, Ozzy Osbourne, Marilyn Manson, on it goes. And let's not forget about all the rap artists that are sometimes considered dangerous and maybe should be censored. I mean, punk bands have gone through this from time to time, et cetera. So this is not new to any form of perceived extreme music, right? So if people worry about this, say nobody should be listening to this, you know, okay, that's fair enough. I'm not criticizing these folks. It's not music for everyone. I get that not everybody's going to enjoy Slayer, and it would be almost impossible to think that anyway. And not everyone has a to each their own mantra, right? I mean, it'd be nice if everyone thought that way, but the reality is lots of folks don't. So this is all good, right? It's one thing to think it, though. It's another to act on it. And that's where the real problems begin. When some of these folks act on their impulses, right? It's not enough to say, I don't think people should listen to Mayhem. They're dangerous. And it's a whole nother thing if you're going to start to take actions to somehow prevent people from listening to it. Now we got a different ball of wax, right? And how is that done? Well, it might be to organize campaigns to ban certain groups, live or on record, and this has happened, okay? This is not a new thing. The heavy metal groups have been banned from playing live in all sorts of locations over time. Again, under public decency, or they're too dangerous or whatever, right? We've seen these folks support the use of warning stickers on offending albums. That is definitely a form of censorship. The PMRC was very successful with that. Or sometimes these folks will go really far and they'll try to hold specific heavy metal artists morally or legally responsible for any type of antisocial or criminal actions of their fans. I mean, Judas Priest has been taken to court, Ozzy has been, and on it goes, right? In particular, certain right-wing conservatives or overzealous religious groups and or self-proclaimed moral majority folks have perpetually had problems with various forms of heavy metal and hard rock. So my antennas are always up for potential censorship issues because, hey, especially if you listen to the extreme forms of metal, the threat is always there, I believe, even if it's in the background. Whenever these factions gain power, it seems to only be a matter of time before more extreme art is in their crosshairs. Okay, not sort of right now, but will it be that way forever? And streaming, I believe, is going to provide an easy avenue for censorship if these actors gain power. All right, let's build on that just a little more. So, when a black metal fan, or actually, I guess a death metal fan too, it's not clear what deicide is in some ways, but an extreme metal fan, let's say that. When an extreme metal fan maintains their deicide collection on CD or vinyl, he or she has effectively shielded it from those who think no one should have access to this art, or at the very least that some type of restrictive measure should be in place, right? Okay. So if I've got deicide, and I've got lots of deicide on CDs, well, no matter what happens with the moral majority, if they suddenly decide, well, this music's obscene, nobody should ever have it, etc. Well, I got it. I don't think they're going to come knocking to my door looking for my deicide. Well, I don't think so, right? So I basically shielded myself from that, right? Or even if somehow physical product gets prevented from being manufactured, there's always going to be aftermarkets, et cetera, right? So I don't think they could ever stop the distribution of deicide's music on CD or vinyl completely, right? Okay. However, if Deicide's music is exclusively rented, right? Remember, you don't have it when you're streaming, you're just renting it. If you're only streaming Deicide's music, one may be optimistically assuming it will always be widely available, that it's always secure, right? I think that's probably optimistic, or it could be optimistic. Okay, let me build on this just a little more. Now, I don't want to pick on any one particular religion, but I think it's fair to say it would be hard to imagine that somebody who's a very devoted Christian, there's almost no chance they're going to champion Deicide's work. And you know what? That is not problematic in any way. Deicide is a pretty extreme band, and they definitely say some things that I'm sure would be offensive to a lot of Christians. And it's completely understandable and justifiable that that person would not want to be a Deicide fan. I mean, they might even like extreme metal, but they might say, you know what, Deicide goes too far. I just don't want to listen to that. And I could not be more cool with that. I think that's completely fine and fair, right? But I think it's also safe to say that the least open-minded of this religious persuasion would relish an opportunity to censor the band's material if they were given the opportunity, right? If those with these inclinations were able to effectively lobby the necessary powers to achieve this goal, right, it would not be difficult to eradicate Deicide or any other offending art from that matter from most or all streaming platforms. That would not be a hard thing to do because streaming operates in this tightly controlled oligopolistic industry. They could probably take Deicide off streaming services within a week if they wanted to, right? If it ever got to that, right? In contrast, it would be impossible to cleanse Deicide from personal collections on, say, CD, right? Now, am I being an alarmist here? Yeah, okay, to a degree, perhaps, right? But then again, did anyone think abortion rights would be walked back so substantially in the US a few years ago? Hey, this stuff happens, right? Never underestimate the vigor of those who think they know better, particularly if they gain the political and the legal leverage to implement their views, right? Bottom line, if you are streaming Deicide or other forms of extreme metal, I'd have a backup plan, but then that's me. So again, I'm arguing that streaming might not be as secure as you might think it is. Okay. It's also not very secure for the artist, especially as a revenue source. Let's dig into that part a little bit. So in this section, I'm calling it streaming alone cannot support heavy music. And I think that it's funny. It seems as technology advances in music, the artists seem to get less and less and less for it, right? And that's sort of been the sad trend. Our old buddy Gene Simmons of Kiss has famously proclaimed that rock is dead, right? Okay, well, I would argue that's an overstatement from the old fire breather, right? But because I think there's still too many good acts out there, so I don't think it's dead. I think it's still pretty vibrant. Certainly metal is in a lot of ways. But he definitely has a point, and I guess this was what Gene's probably really emphasizing. He definitely has a point about an artist's diminishing ability to make a decent living from doing music. I mean, I think he's bang on there. Okay, if we look at sort of the more traditional approaches, if a band has a typical contract with their record company and they write their own songs, they are likely to receive maybe 10 to 20% of the wholesale price for each new CD or vinyl recording, right, that gets sold, okay? Now, for most musical groups, this was a quite lucrative in the days when physical product was the primary way people consumed music, right? So back in the day when almost everybody was buying CDs or almost everybody was buying vinyl or a little of both, even cassettes, right? Okay, most bands, and you didn't have to be a mega band. Even a band that was, reasonably well known, they were getting pretty good return for that, provided they didn't sign a completely terrible contract with their record company. But if it was a reasonable contract, they did okay with that, right? But this previously reliable revenue source became extremely eroded by initially the arrival of digital downloads, and then the oligopolistically structured streaming industry that compensates with minuscule proportions per transaction, right? So I went to a source called Headphone SD, and they listed sort of the average payout for each song, and it's as follows. It's not all the companies, but it's got 7 of some of the more popular ones, right? So Tidal actually pays the best, right? So Tidal will pay $0.013, or essentially just over a cent for each stream towards I don't want to say to the artist, because we're going to see it doesn't all get to the artist, but for an artist's work, let's put it that way. Apple pays a cent, YouTube pays 0.008, so less than a cent. Deezer pays .0064, a little less. Amazon pays .004, so maybe less than half a cent. Spotify about a third of a cent, right? 0.0033. Pandora less, etc. Right? So you sort of get the idea, right? Now, again, as I mentioned, there are a few other significant platforms that are more regional in focus, such as Tencent Music in China, but each pay basically in this range or around what Spotify pays basically, which isn't surprising. You know, you're going to pay basically what the oligopolists are doing because the oligopolists set the pace, as we were talking about, and Spotify is the biggest of the big, so it kind of makes sense, right? Regardless of the system, regardless, the system definitely favors the megastars because a lot of physical units need to be moved and or truly massive streaming tallies must be attained for the monetary value to be significant, right? Okay, so if you're Metallica, right, you're probably doing okay with streaming, right? Because of the massive volume. Metallica actually has billions of yearly streams, billions, okay? So even though Metallica is getting, you know, these fractions of a cent for each of their streams, when you're dealing with volumes in the billions, you're still going to make a lot of money, right? Just because of the pure volume, right? But let's face it, most heavy bands are not remotely comparable in terms of popularity to Metallica, right? Metallica is, I mean, they're still a really heavy band, but Metallica is very mainstream as well, right? Most heavy bands are nowhere near Metallica's status. With download sales in steep decline and physical product purchases far lower than in previous decades, it's really proceeds from live touring that has become crucial because few artists will stay financially viable through streaming revenues alone, right? And we're gonna, on that last point, I'm going to do a little demonstration for you to show you just how little most bands, unless you're Metallica, but if you're below Metallica, and almost every heavy band is, or all heavy bands are, you're not making that much. Consider the case of Cannibal Corpse. And the reason I picked Cannibal Corpse, a veteran American death metal band originally out of Buffalo, the reason I picked Cannibal is because they are, by most measures, the most successful extreme metal band that we have, right? And so if you're an extreme metal band, anything I say for Cannibal Corpse in terms of how much they're making from streaming, you can assume it's going to be much less, okay? Because Cannibal's basically at the top in terms of their sales and their streams, etc. Okay, let's do a little demo of good old Cannibal Corpse. How much does Cannibal Corpse CC from here on in get from streaming? Okay, so I had to make a few assumptions. I mean, I'm not privy to their balance sheet, so I don't know for sure, but I think the numbers I'm coming up with are going to give you a pretty good ballpark idea of how much or how little really Cannibal Corpse gets from streaming, even though they're the most successful of the extreme bands, you know, that we have. Okay, so initially this is going to look pretty impressive. Actually, Spotify has, and you can get this information, right? It's not a secret. Cannibal Corpse averages 600,000 streams on Spotify per month, right? 600,000. That sounds like a pretty big number. Okay, so how much per year? Well, wow, 600,000 times 12. So there's 7.2 million Cannibal Corpse streams occurring on Spotify every year. Now we're in the millions. So you might think, well, boy, Cannibal Corpse must be doing okay. That's 7.2 million a year, right? And that's just 1 year even, right? Okay. Well, it gets even better. At least it appears to get even better. We could also assume, or estimate at least, we know that Spotify has almost exactly 1/3 of global share of streamings, right? So if you want to know how many streams is Cannibal Corpse getting from all streaming platforms? Well, you just multiply that number by 3, and that'll give you a pretty good estimate, right? So if you take 7.2 and multiply it by 3, now we're up to 21.6 million streams of Cannibal Corpse music from all platforms. So now you might think, well, 21.6 million? Wow, Cannibal Corpse must be rolling in the dough here. No, even though that number, I mean, it's impressive to see millions and stuff, but as you'll see, when we crunch the numbers, it's an illusion. Okay, so Deezer provides the median or average payout. So if you remember just before, I was showing you examples of the payout structure of 7 streaming platform companies. The Deezer value happened to be in the middle, which really isn't that different from Spotify. So I thought, okay, I'll take the average or the median payout from that source, and it turned out it was Deezer. So again, if you take 21.6 million streams and multiply that by the payout structure, so you multiply that by 0.0064, okay, that ends up being $138,240 per year that all streaming platforms are paying out for Cannibal Corpse's streamings. Now, I'm not going to say that that's what Cannibal Corpse gets, because that's not what they get. But that's how much money that gets paid out because of people streaming Cannibal Corpse music. That's what gets paid from the providers, okay? But other things are happening here. Assume that that Cannibal Corpse's label, which is Metal Blade, which, by the way, Metal Blade, I think Cannibal Corpse has been on Metal Blade their entire career, and it's a pretty artist-friendly, especially metal artist-friendly label. So I'm going to assume that Metal Blade cut a really good deal with Cannibal Corpse. And let's say Metal Blade decided, you know what, Cannibal, you guys get to keep half of the proceeds from streaming. Now, it probably isn't that high. It might be, but again, you know, I'm being optimistic here. So any of the numbers I'm giving you, they're in reality, they're probably even lower. But let's say they cut a really good deal with Metal Blade, and Metal Blade say, you know what, you guys get to keep half, because that's what happens, by the way, right? When you stream from Spotify an album from Cannibal Corpse, right? That money, those streams that Spotify pays to the record label, not directly to the artist, right? And then the record label decides how much they're going to pay to the artist based on whatever deal they made with them, right? Okay, so we'll assume that Metal Blade's very artist friendly, and they're saying, Cannibal Corpse, you get to keep half, right? But I would think in a lot of cases it probably isn't that high. But anyway, so you take 138,000 and change, divide that by 2. Now we're up to 69,000 roughly a year left for the group Cannibal Corpse. Okay, well, that's what the entire group gets. All right, so the last assumption, let's assume, and this also is an optimistic assumption because this probably doesn't happen, but let's say Cannibal Corpse has decided that they have 5 members, and they've had 5 members for most of their career. So we'll say, all right, they got 5 members, right? And everybody's going to share equally from streams, which again might not often be the reality. Often it's who did the most songwriting will usually get the most royalties and stuff. But we'll just assume they decided we're going to be democratic and everybody's going to share equally. Okay. Assume all 5 members of Cannibal Corpse share equally. Therefore, you got to take 69,120 and divide that by 5. So that amounts to just under $14,000 a year for each member of Cannibal Corpse from streaming, all right? That ain't that much money, all right? Think about it yourself. How much money as an individual, if you only were making $14,000 a year as a revenue source, I mean, it's better than nothing. It's better than zero. You'll take it, but that ain't going to get you too far, is it, right? So even though the numbers sound really good, 7.2 million streams a year, the amount of money they're making, no big deal, right? So unless you're Metallica, this is not a reliable revenue stream, right? Okay. So considering that most extreme metal or more obscure hard rock acts are considerably below Cannibal Corpse, like they're kind of the best case scenario in a lot of ways when we're talking about extreme metal, right? It's easy to see that this mode of music access, i.e. streaming, is not lucrative. And really, it's only attractive relative to illegal downloads, which in case you get nothing. So like 14,000 is better than nothing, but it still ain't that much, right? Therefore, seeing millions of streams might look good, but it provides little in the way of significant compensation, right? So just to wrap this section up, the traditional approach of buying CDs, or for that matter, vinyl, t-shirts, posters, hats, all that stuff, but essentially tangible items from a local record store ideally, but even online, is a far more artist-friendly approach than streaming ever will be, right? Better still, purchase physical product at the concerts or buy it directly from the band's website. If you do that, right, what you're doing is you're giving the group or the artist maximum cut of the action, okay? But still, buying the CDs, even if you buy it from Amazon or whatever, you're still giving the group a lot more money than if you stream it, right? Okay. And the importance of concerts are still really important to bands. By physically being at a concert, you contribute to what is likely the most reliable revenue source for most hard rock and metal bands, the live experience, as opposed to streaming low quality YouTube concert footage, which they're getting pretty much nothing for, right? Okay, I realize that there are fans who have replaced their CD and vinyl purchases with streaming services several years ago. And again, if you have, cool, no problem there. And some of these fans even make a genuine effort to support their favorite groups through donations via Bandcamp and the like, and who deliberately buy merch whenever possible. So they stream Cannibal Corpse, or they stream Mayhem or other extreme bands, but they go to Bandcamp and they make donations, or they make sure to buy a Mayhem cap or whatever, right? Cool, really cool, right? But the problem is that there just are not enough of these, you might call supportive streamers, to make an appreciable difference. In fact, the attitude's actually going the other way, I'm sad to report, and I'm going to really build on this in part 3. A growing number of consumers have the notion that music is, or at least should be, free. That's probably the biggest demon that streaming is doing to us, I think. And again, I'm going to really build on that in the next part. This attitude that music really should be free most assuredly is cultivated by the ease and the relative inexpensiveness of digital music transfer, right? Unfortunately, too many people seem oblivious to the reality that if musicians are not being paid adequately, a lot less of them are going to keep playing professionally. And when that happens, we all lose, right? Sometimes the Kiss demon Gene Simmons gets it right. Okay, so join me for part 3, where I'm really going to build on that idea that streaming is distorting the value of music. It's making it almost valueless. And I think that's the heart of the problem here, I believe, is really that. And I'm going to do it by making specific reference to one of my all-time favorite bands, Rush. I hope you'll join me for part 3. In the meantime, have a fantastic day.